Hello and welcome to the Savage Movie Night Podcast. Today we are continuing to talk about the 1980 John Cassavetes classic Gloria. I'm your most likely to be on the run hiding in a flophouse host, Adam. Joining me, as always, is my always holding a gun on every bellman they meet co-host, Kristen. Hi, Kristen.
It's the only way to be, man.
Well, you can never trust them.
You can never trust them.
And, of course, the show wouldn't be complete without our forced to face his past dating a mob boss co-host, Rob. Hi, Rob.
I am a man. How you doing, man?
Good. It is February and Valentine's Day month. As you two are happily married people, any Valentine's Day tips to the single losers out there like me?
It's a crapshoot.
I mean, my husband and I were high school sweethearts, so like my dating experience was like one other serious relationship before him. But that being said, I mean, being married for 5 years and we've been together for 12. I think really it's just to find somebody who is okay with you completely, like as you are, your weirdness, your bad days, good days, you know, just someone who gets you. That's the best advice I can give. And I don't know. And I guess communicate is a huge one. Very much just like talk to each other and don't like let things fester for a long time. It's better. Even if it's like the smallest thing. Sometimes I'm just like, I don't like how you said that to me 2 hours ago. And he'll be like, oh, okay, sorry. Like, you know, things like that, where it's just like, you don't let things fester. And that's what works for us.
Yeah. No, Kristen giving actual sound, incredibly solid, actual advice, which, you know, just brings the entertainment value down to zero.
God forbid that I have a functioning relationship that I'm happy about and want to say nice things about. Love is in the air.
Well, and, you know, Kristen, I was thinking, you know, you mentioned you were high school sweethearts, and you're like, you know, so, you know, you didn't have much experience before that. And so I was thinking, yeah, your Valentine's Day dating before that was just like the handing out of the Valentines, you know, in like middle school.
Exactly.
Right. I had like one other high school relationship and it wasn't very intense.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So, Rob, you've got, you know, a little more than 5 years under your belt married.
I've got, wow. You know what? After 20, I lose count. It's been 20 something, 22, 23. I would just say don't let the time, don't think of all the rest of your life. Just find a good partner and handle things day by day, and conquer your days, conquer your challenges, and time flies, man.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, you know, very good advice. You know, advice that maybe could have been used by someone. Good advice was sorely lacking for people in the movie. And as we will learn as we go through it, because in today's episode, we are going to learn if Canon Films ever made a good movie, how much alcohol one liver can handle in a lifetime, and most importantly, why Ryan Gosling is here. Because we are continuing to talk all about the 1980 John Cassavetes classic, Gloria. But first, a word from our sponsors. Today's sponsor is No Regrets, the music and spirit of Billie Holiday, an in-depth 13-episode radio and live streaming series celebrating Billie Holiday's extraordinary musical legacy. The program explores her early life, groundbreaking singing style, and the powerful impact of Strange Fruit on the civil rights movement. It is produced by the award-winning Steve Robinson and written by NEA Jazz Grandmaster and host of Jazzology, Willard Jenkins. No Regret is narrated by Rhonda Hamilton. The series features interviews with Angela Davis, Cassandra Wilson, Beth Roars, Andromeda Toure, Phil Schaap, Dan Morgenstern, and many more. All episodes of No Regrets, the music and spirit of Billie Holiday, are now ready for you to stream on savagecontent.com/no-regrets. That's savagecontent.com/no-regrets. Today we are continuing to talk about the 1980 classic from director John Cassavetes' Gloria. In part one, we talked about John's background and previous work and the early part of the film. Highly recommend you go back and check it out if you haven't already. But in case you don't, or you just need a refresher, Phil Dawn is a 6-year-old boy whose parents have made poor life decisions. They needed better advice from Rob and Kristen. Chiefly, his father, an accountant for the mob, has been skimming money and informing to the FBI at the same time. Bold move, Cotton. Let's see how it plays out. When the mob find out, the entire family, including children, are marked for death. Phil, along with his father's book of all the mob money stuff, is sent into hiding with neighbor Gloria Swenson, a tough, streetwise, connected, middle-aged lady who doesn't like kids. After they hear Phil's parents and sister killed by the thugs, they sneak out of the building and go on the run, unsure of what they are going to do next. And that is basically where we left off. So, Kristen, take us back into the plot.
Yeah, so I think we're about where we left off. They were on the run and had just gotten away from something. They're hiding out in this other apartment building. So once they're in this new apartment building from a friend of hers, and of course they can't stay in there for very long because eventually the gangsters start poking around the apartment building they're staying in now. And so Gloria and Phil, they sneak out before the gangsters can close in on them. On the sidewalk, Gloria is trying to get Phil to run home because she is just like done with this whole situation at this point. The constant running and always having to be on guard. She's like, I can't get involved in this mess any longer. But Phil, who like 20 minutes ago was trying to get away from her, now sees that like, oh, she's like an authority figure and can protect me, and he doesn't want to leave her side. So there's that slight shift in their relationship there. And another reason that is important to note that why she wants to get out of this situation is because the gangsters that are after her are actually her friends. She has connections, remember that. And so they're on like the sidewalk, like she's on the sidewalk outside with Phil, and they pull up and they are trying to confront her and trying to get her to give up Phil and the ledger. And she's like, trying to get away, trying to figure out a solution. And when she realizes there's no solution, she shoots a revolver at their car, which takes off and flips over. And then Gloria realizes that their fates are way too intertwined, that she's just going to have to get them to leave New York in order to survive. So to do that, Gloria goes to the bank, empties her safe deposit box, and then the two settle in for the night at a flop house. For those who aren't familiar, it's basically a like super budgetary place to sleep. I had to Google it. But Gloria wants to burn the book, but the kid doesn't want to. He sees it as like an important thing from his father. And so the plan for them is to escape to Pittsburgh. But first they decide to stop at a cemetery because Gloria wants to give Phil like a chance to give an informal goodbye to his family.
The moment I liked this film, like I said to myself, I really like this movie, or at least I like this movie, was when Gloria takes the gun and just starts bucking right at, like there's 4 gangsters in the car and they're serious, and you know obviously they want her, they want the kid, especially in the book. And the way she whips out the gun and starts shooting with no hesitation, she pulls like the most gangster move before anybody else does. She shoots right at them. She gets at 2, maybe 3 of them, including the driver, which is why the car flips over. That was a great moment. I like that a lot.
Well, and then she has that super badass line where she just turns around, looks around afterward, goes, taxi.
Yes.
Yeah,
one other
man,
thing too.
she's
I
such
got the
badass.
impression. Sorry, I got the impression that, and I could be wrong here. Correct me, guys, but I could have sworn that second apartment that she went to, I felt like it was one of the mob guys because she used to like mess around with him. Is that not right?
I don't think.
I thought it was like a female friend's apartment, but I could be wrong.
Okay, because she knew where the gun was
Yeah.
at the apartment. She grabbed him the gun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could have been someone within the mob. That would be stupid though. She's kind of smarter than that, so I feel like she wouldn't go to an apartment of like where somebody in the mob that is after her would know where she's at.
Yeah.
But then again, how did they find her so fast?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And you know, while we're stopped for a second, you know, you had the bit where she's trying to get Phil to run away, and it's very much like you've taken a dog upstate and like go on, we don't want you anymore. Or like
Mm-hmm.
Rob, Harry, and the Hendersons, where they're trying to get Bigfoot to leave. You know,
Exactly. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. So that was, some ways kind of comedic. And as they're escaping down the stairwell uh, from the guys in the building when the guys are searching, there's one point where there's a gangster coming up, and so they kind of duck into this doorway of, like the apartment door is closed, so they're just in this little doorway, and the gangster goes up and he's ostensibly looking around for them, walks past them, keeps going. I'm like, I get they kind of try and indicate he just misses them, like they're just deep enough in the doorway. He just doesn't see him and isn't paying enough attention. But to me, it was still kind of very much like movie logic of like, there's no way he wouldn't have seen them. Like they are going to be very obvious standing there.
So after the cemetery scene, there is a part at a restaurant where they're having some food, and Gloria's explaining to Phil, like, you're 6 years old. You cannot be by yourself. Like, you need to hang out with me. You need to stay around. You need to stay alive by staying near me. And this is when Phil, I think, is starting to get more of, he's definitely respecting her a little bit more. He calls her like tough and strong, and even more so feels this way after Gloria confronts this other group of gangsters that are eyeing them at the restaurant, and she asks for immunity in exchange for the ledger, but one of them is like, only Mr. Tanzini can agree to that. So she's like, all right, and just takes some of their guns and gets the heck out of there, and they hide somewhere else for the night. It's basically like, oh, you're not going to do what I want? Cool. I'll shoot you. Goodbye.
Yeah,
Man.
it was a conversation at gunpoint, which is how she was able to do all this.
Yeah, out in like super public.
Yeah,
right.
So before that, Kristen, you'd had the cemetery scene that you'd wanted to jump back to.
Yeah, because like I have never had that thought of like, you don't know where a family member is or what has the fate of somebody, so you just say goodbye to a grave at a graveyard. I don't know. I've never thought of it that way, but it was kind of a nice moment, like a kind of way to kind of let him say goodbye.
It was a really sweet, setup where she's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Like when you've lost someone, it doesn't matter if you're at their grave, just so long as you're at a grave, you can still,
reach them.
Say what you want to them. And so that also kind of ends up setting up Chekhov's cemetery for later in the plot.
I thought that what was cute was Phil, and you see this with young kids who don't really know. I don't know if you guys caught that, but he couldn't do the sign of the cross, so he put his two arms up to make a cross. Did you see that? It was really cute. It was hilarious. Things that little kids do. That was a nice little touch.
It's fun.
I missed that, but that so not being raised Catholic and then suddenly going to a Catholic school, like I had no clue how to do the sign of the cross. It was actually a movie that taught me how to do the sign of the cross. Rob,
yeah, that makes sense.
Can you guess what movie it might have been?
The Exorcist?
One of the Austin Powers movies.
The Exorcist was a good guess.
Yeah. Which, spoilers, we will be talking a bit about The Exorcist next month. Because that is very much connected to the movie we're going to talk about. But no, it was one of the Austin Powers movies. He makes some joke about like doing the sign of the cross, and he says like spectacles, testicles, wallet, and watch. That was also how I, having learned that, that was then how I remembered upstairs, downstairs, inside, outside for in Spanish, arriba, abajo, afuera, adentro.
Yes, with the tequila.
So
I'm glad you knew that before the sign of the cross.
Educational.
They can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So getting back into the next part of the movie here, It's
Yeah.
still Gloria just trying to figure out what they're going to do, what the next step is. And Gloria's next idea is sending Phil to a boarding school. That way she doesn't have to deal with him. He's safe. He's somewhere else. But Phil does not want that. And he claims he is an independent grown man who can manage alone. And so Gloria has like had it with him. She's like, all right, well, I can't send you to boarding school. I don't know what else to do here. I'm just going to go to the bar across the street, do whatever you want, man. You're a grown man. Sounds good. See ya. And pretty
It's
soon after
8:30 in the morning, by the way.
yeah, it's very early. And she's like, you know what, man, I'm going to get a drink. And instantly is pretty like guilty about doing that. She realizes, oh crap, I just left like a 6-year-old by himself in the city. And so she kind of rushes to go to look for him, tracks him down. He's with a group of other kids. And that's when, like Phil, he locks eyes with Gloria, and then he runs off. I was laughing because I accidentally put Julia in my script instead of Gloria. I was like, wait a minute, that's not her name.
No, she's super dead by this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. So that happens. And as Phil is running away, he gets captured by some quote wise guys. And Gloria has to go in and try to rescue him, and she kills a mobster in the process. And there's this really interesting moment where Phil is really upset that she did it, because he's like, you just killed the father of another kid, just like that's what happened to my father. You just like did that to another kid. And so that was really a really interesting part of the film. We can talk about that here in a second. And after that, she is able to get Phil out of there, and they go into a taxi. But there are still a couple of people that she didn't kill that are chasing her. So the chase is still on, and they get on the subway, and Phil and Gloria get separated when Phil doesn't get off their stop in time, and like off their stop, yeah, whatever, they get separated. And then some of the gang members attack her on the train, but several bystanders help her escape, and then she is able to reunite with Phil.
Down, yeah, the next, but over, I think, 42nd Street, was it? I think that was the stop, because she had been trying to yell at him to get off at 42nd, and
So they can,
they do reunite. I want to back up for just a second, because when she goes into the bar, when she's first leaving Phil, there is a guy that I want to mention there who, they say don't judge a book by its cover, but this guy right here is kind of more popular because strictly the way he looks. His name is Lawrence Tierney, who plays the bartender there. Lawrence Tierney, most of you guys would know, he plays the role of Joe Cabot from Reservoir Dogs. He's the old dude who's trying to get the whole crew together and pays for the job, right? That's the role he had in Reservoir Dogs. It's funny because in some of the research, like there was this a film critic named David Kerr in the New York Times who described hulking Tierney as not so much an actor, but as a frightening force of nature. If you know that guy, you can tell. I mean, he is a character.
Well, he got his start, his big break was in the 40s, playing John Dillinger in the movie Dillinger, and he just played a lot of tough guys, and his career was marred by he kept getting arrested for bar fights through most of his life. But then he's also an absolute jerk. He was on Seinfeld, and the cast from Seinfeld have stories about him stealing a knife from set, and when he gets caught going towards Julia Louis-Dreyfus or Jerry, whichever one caught him, and making psycho noises as he waves the knife at him, so going and then he was on The Simpsons. He played a security guard. There's a Christmas episode around season 8 or so where Bart steals a video game and gets caught, and it's a whole thing with him and Marge. But he plays the head of security at the store that happened, and the directors are he is the worst person we ever didn't want to take direction, was abusive, we had a hard time convincing him not to do everything in a strange Southern accent. Like, like, I mean, just awful to deal with. But, so, he's this weird name where like he's in a bunch of stuff, but also like never rose to the level he could have been, which is why he's very much a blink and you miss it role here, where you really have to be paying attention. But it's also funny, like, you talk about like it was so early, like this scene happens, like it's taking place at like 8:30 in the morning. Like they specifically say 8:30 in the morning because Gloria asks him what time it is. She goes, "Oh, wow, you open early." And he goes, "Yeah, no, we open at 8 a.m." And,
There
then
she is, yeah, having a drink and a cigarette, and that's the other thing too, right? Like you forget how much smoking there was and what was in films and what was just part of culture back then. But she is a chimney.
yeah, well, and it's also like the early 80s, like there was still pretty much, there were very few places you couldn't smoke.
Right.
It was
Those
only as you
airplanes.
progressed through the 80s that you would start to get restrictions on places you can smoke and get like no smoking sections in restaurants, which was kind of a joke because you still had the smoking sections blowing everything over.
Mm-hmm.
But then, and then it wasn't for the most of the country, it wasn't until into the 2000s that, smoking got banned indoors just about everywhere. And even as someone who smokes, I say that's a very good thing.
So you had mentioned Lawrence Tierney as being a blink. I got to tell you, you called out John Finnegan. That was a blink to me.
I recognized his face when I watched it, just because
Okay.
he's a character actor and he's got one of those faces. Also, he's in a bunch of Columbo, and I've watched every episode,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes multiple times. So
Was he one of the mob guys that was going after her in the train?
no, he's the old white guy in the scene with where Gloria kills the father.
Okay. Okay.
So the like heavy set middle aged white guy with like white hair,
Right.
who's in
You're
the
describing
apartment.
half of America.
I know, but like in that particular scene,
Right.
there's the more Puerto Rican looking gentleman who's part of the mob, and presumably his son and Phil, and then this old white guy, and then eventually Gloria also enters the apartment. But Gloria definitely shoots the older white guy. She might shoot the other one as well. And so he might have even technically been the father. It might have been a situation where it was similar to like Buck Henry's. I don't remember. But, just again, like just a very recognizable. And then, he's also in like An American Tale, and he'd been in some, other Cassavetes stuff, like A Woman Under the Influence. And he would also be in Big Trouble, which I think the less said from that. Well, and also he was in The Natural, which, I'd watched for when we did toys. So, and that's around this same time period. So his face was looking very familiar to me.
Well, and then the other one that I completely missed, and I was such a big fan of the movie Warriors that it was disappointing that I missed this when I saw your note about Gregory Cleghorn. Do you recall? I don't even remember. I guess he was a kid in the elevator.
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
that was something I found in my research. I couldn't pinpoint him, but like information about the movie mentions that he's in it and he is a connection to another one of the episodes.
yeah. Well, but
Yeah, he was a Grand
maybe
Machine F, I
he's
guess.
yeah. Well, maybe he's the one messing with the elevator at the start of the movie.
That could be. That makes
No,
more
because
sense.
I think it said it was a kid. Like at least that's what it mentioned, and so that's why I don't know. Either way, there apparently a member of the Gramercy Riffs makes an appearance in this movie from the Warriors.
Yeah.
Listeners, correct us.
You can figure out, you can identify because
screenshot it and share it with us on social media. That's at Savage Movie Nights. That's Movie Nights with an S.
And I mean, while we're talking about
Cheap plug.
kids, I just gotta say, like, I know I said it in part one, but man, Phil is a savage. He is crazy. Some of the things, the lines they give him. I mean, we already kind of talked a bit in part one about some of the stuff where it sounds like it doesn't sound like a kid would say, but then some other stuff, I'm just like, man, this kid is brutal. Because like, there's one point where like he's like, "You're not my mother because my mother's beautiful," and I was like, "Jesus, kid!
Yeah.
Oh my god, don't come for her
Which
like
that's
that."
a very kid like that. Like as much as like in part one, I was talking about like, well, a lot of the be a man stuff doesn't sound like a kid. That sounds like a kid.
Yes, yeah, that's why
like
it
a
stood out
little
to me.
kid being a brat.
Yeah.
I say thank you because I'm Team Phil. I could tell by the first episode that I'm Team Phil. Well, you are not, Adam.
I'm middle. Like it's like I low key hate the kid, but I also understand the kid.
I don't hate him. I just think he could have been written better, and I think his performance for a non-actor child, it's not the worst, but especially given the material doesn't help because he doesn't have a real understanding of what he's saying or how he should say it, so it leads it to coming off very monotone and unbelievable when it's coming out of his mouth.
You know something else I noticed that I thought was weird was like Gloria just kept saying like he doesn't know how to speak English. Like she said that times, and I'm like, he's speaking English fine. Like I don't know if that was like a change in the script that they just forgot about or what.
No, she's trying to protect him. So when
okay,
you're trying to,
like just kind of pretend like he's
when you're trying to hide a kid, saying you don't have to kill a 6-year-old. For a book, like he can't even speak English. You're trying to downplay everything about him.
Yeah,
he's just Bobo. He doesn't know.
Yeah, I get that, but I feel like Rob, there are also times she says that directly to him, like, "What do you know, kid? You can't even speak English."
That's true because he didn't even have an accent.
Yeah, no, he just sounded like he was on helium. Like,
but that's what happens when you look for a kid for a movie at the playground and not an acting agency. It's just he's just some kid off the street that they thought, okay, he looks the part.
Right. Well, and like also speaking of like weird ways, like to find kids, like after she loses him at the bar, which there's that great bit of like, hey, I don't want to look, but tell me if there's a kid still standing out there. She's then driving around in a cab, and apparently all she told the cab driver is, hey, just drive around. I'm looking for a Puerto Rican kid. And the cab driver's just like, sure, no problem.
He ends up being cool as hell, though. I like that cab driver is cool. I don't know if you caught, at the end of that one chase, he ends up, he wants some skin or something, give me 5.
Oh, yeah. Well, there are a couple, like he's a cool cab driver, and there's a cool cab driver later on in another scene, that we can talk about. But it's still like he is remarkably asking few questions and not being suspicious of this very suspicious behavior.
I think that's very ordinary for
I was going to say, this is what, New York? It's New York,
this
right?
is the Bronx in New York.
It's just the vibe there, I guess. They're just like, I don't ask questions, not my business.
Like, hey, I mean, she might as well have just said like, hey, I'm looking to kidnap a kid. Can you drive around for a bit until I spot the right one? And he's like, yeah, sure.
It doesn't help that she's driving past like the group of kids on the stoop. That's even worse. But I mean, another weird element that we haven't talked about yet is just some of the weird dialogue that they have with Gloria and Phil, especially because there's like a point where like Phil is like, "Oh, I love you, Gloria," and then she is basically like, there's a weird bed scene and there's a couple of comments. I can't remember them exactly, but I remember being like, I wish they just didn't include that.
I remember one because I could have sworn that he had said it a couple of times, but I think that he said he was trying to basically let her know that I'm down with you now, right? Like you're my one, you're my mom, you're this, you're that, you're also my girlfriend. And I kind of get that. I can see Adam, you're about to say that, but I can see
Little kids say weird
say
stuff.
that though. They say stuff like that because it's a meaningful thing with what they think a girlfriend is, right? But then she responds, and I think she's covered up, but he is in his underwear,
Yeah.
and she
And
says
like
something to the
fully
fact, like,
laid out, like the camera is like really making
yeah.
sure you see all of the kid.
Yeah, no, it's an Underoos commercial. I mean, you see it, right? Oh,
Yeah.
you don't know what that is. Sorry, guys.
Oh no,
Anyways,
I know what underoos are.
no,
Gotcha.
I'm thinking
I had
of
plenty of them.
Kristen and but she says with a body like yours. And I forget what she said, but the mere fact that she said with a body like yours, I was like, oh,
Oh,
that's
like
creepy.
well, she says something like, "With a body like yours, how could I resist?" It's a little sarcastic, but that you're even bringing up his body in the
And there
first
was
place.
also a point where she was like, "You're not the worst guy I've slept with," or something.
Yes,
and I was
yeah.
like, "Girl," I'm like, "Why did they put that in there, man? The '80s were wild."
Well, it's also again like we talked about. Like a lot of people joked that all this stuff between Phil and Gloria is actually kind of mirroring the relationship between Cassavetes and Gena Rowlands, where he's constantly,
yeah, that's
like,
hilarious.
like I am the man, you listen to me, you are my woman, I love you. And she's always doing the, get away from me,
Do what I want.
yeah. Well, and, also, so that makes it even more awkward that, this is almost a stand-in for their relationship.
Yeah, so weird, man. I just don't understand. Some of these directors, like it's just like you're showing a little too much of yourself here, buddy. Like, let's reel it in. Like we don't need to know all of that about you.
Yeah. But Rob, with Underoos, I'm honestly surprised, with all this nostalgia in the culture that they haven't done like
I know
an adult throwback version of Underoos, or
until they hear this episode, and then someone's gonna
Someone,
yeah. Well,
right
but
now.
I mean, especially like on Valentine's Day, be like, baby, I'm ready. Bust out the He-Man Underoos.
I'm googling it right now, and so anyone listening, if you Google Underoos, you're gonna get some funny. Oh wow, this is hilarious.
Rob, you're gonna become a red dot. You're gonna have to introduce yourself to all your neighbors every time you move.
Look at that, hilarious. This is grown men in Underoos. What's happening here?
No, Rob. Rob, we're gonna get put on a watch list.
Wait, what's this? Okay, all right.
Probably all of that conversation. Anyway, clearly things are moving on. Clearly things are not great with Gloria and Phil. No matter where they go, they find them. They're always on the run. Things are rough. And Gloria is like, they're too strong. They're everywhere. I don't know what to do. And there's this moment that I like that where someone knocks at the door and she's like, they're here again, of course. And so she's ready to take out whoever it is, but then it's like a worker delivering flowers to welcome them to the hotel. So that was a funny little like lighthearted moment before a bunch of more action and running. But Gloria and Phil, they have another chat about her being his new mother. And it's at this point where Phil kind of accepts the idea this time. They're growing closer, and she's like, I mean, if you want, like, I could be like a parent to you. And little Phil drops some wisdom in this moment where he says, you can't shoot people and run forever. And Gloria explains to Phil the next day that she was once the mistress of Tanzini himself, the guy who's in charge of all these mobsters that have been after them. And she tells Phil if she isn't back in 3.5 hours, he should meet her at the train station to head to Pittsburgh. Gloria meets with Tanzini and then tries to give him the ledger and pleads her case to spare the kid with different ways to try to be like, listen, he's 6 years old. You really don't have to kill him. He's really not a loose end. But they still insist on taking Phil. So she flees, kills one gangster in the process. And then as she's going down in the elevator, another one shoots at the moving elevator car. And so we don't really know what happens to her from that moment. We cut to Phil. He's waiting a couple hours, and then he does go to Pittsburgh via the rail. And so he's in Pittsburgh by himself, and he ends up going to the cemetery. And Phil is speaking to a grave. And he is like speaking to Gloria at this grave because he's assuming that she died to protect him because she never came back to the hotel room. But then Gloria arrives in a limo, disguised as Phil's grandmother, after miraculously surviving her ordeal. They've reunited and embrace. Roll credits.
And he does like the such a kid thing, like immediately sees her and pulls that wig right off. Like that, you know, a
Yeah.
kid will pull your wig, literally. Like
Rob knows from his long
They see through the
experience
bullshit.
wearing wigs.
yes,
They see
Kristen.
through it.
Hilarious.
Honestly, that kid was so brave for going to the city alone. Like, you know, he like I can't even imagine. Like going to a whole city by myself as an adult is scary. I can't imagine being 6 years old and just being like,
I
"Yep,
think
this is where I gotta go."
Well, and that
this
gets in. Yeah, sorry, Rob. Go ahead.
this is a big, and I don't know exactly what point you're about to make, Adam, but I found my way in here to just. I think this is one of the reasons why I like this movie a lot. There was a lot of things that reminded me about living in the city and being in you know, my childhood and being raised by a single mother, but a very strong one. She didn't shoot at anybody, but a very strong
That
one.
you know of.
She would
that I
have
know.
if needed. If needed, she could have done it.
But also I had this I had this spirit of independence and felt that I could not do whatever, but that I could venture out into the big world on my own at a very young, which I actually did in you know, by first, second, and third grade, taking the city buses on my own, things that I would never let my kids do now. I think all that stuff is what kind of spoke to me. And also I realized later on that a lot of this, and I made a joke one time when we weren't recording that, you know, I felt like in the train that we were going to run into the Warriors. This was the Bronx, this was New York, and I think all of this kind of relates to my attachment to even hip hop. So like all this mixed together is all very familiar to me, and so I think that's why I gravitate to this movie.
Yeah, no. I mean that all makes sense. You know, it's that, you know, uh, world you find familiar and comforting. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, for me, what I was going to say is, Rob, I know, you know, you've mentioned, you know, offline, even at a young age, you were taking some of the inner city, you know, like within the city, public transportation and stuff like that, buses and subways. But I think that there's a big difference between that and a 6-year-old coming up and saying, "Can I buy a ticket to Pittsburgh?" And the
Yeah.
person there not batting an eye, being like, you know, I think legally I need to say something about this, you know.
I think it's very much about the culture too, because like when I go to Mexico now, and you know, when you see kids who, whether it be by choice or kind of force, working at, you know, just out in the streets and working, something that you don't see over here, you see a different kind of I don't know, it almost feels like that would be more acceptable there, and I can understand how it was at one time here.
Yeah, but I think even by 1980 that had already changed. I mean, like you're getting into the era of like kids on milk cartons and being, you know, you know, stranger danger and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's the same thing like with, you know, not just the ticket taker, but also like the businessman once he gets to Pittsburgh is, you know, you
Yeah,
know,
that was interesting.
you know, not just oddly you know, cool about like, oh, here's a little kid just on his own in a city he's never been to before, you know, but also, you know, very helpful to the point like you're, you know, like almost worried for the kid,
Yep.
like is he gonna, you know, take you into his windowless van or something, you
Right.
know? But
Mm-hmm.
no, he was just supposed to be an example of a very helpful human. Um,
It's
uh,
fiction, you know.
yeah. Well, you
But
know,
yeah, I think like I did like how it ended, even though, you know, it had a bit of a cheese factor, but you know, it's
yeah,
still it was sweet, it was sentimental.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, especially like it very much felt set up like to not have the mega happy ending, like very
Mm-hmm.
much felt set up where, you know, Gloria is going to sacrifice herself.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, like there's a part of your brain that goes, I'm not quite sure how she actually made it out of that. Like that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
seem to logically make sense. And apparently, like in part one, we talked about Cassavetes getting into an argument with one of the actual mobsters they had working in the film, who I believe So, and it was that scene that he was criticizing, that the mobster was like, that the hitman was criticizing, like, there's no way we would have done it like that, or, like, wouldn't do that, and Cassavetes like, no, this is how we're doing in the movie.
I mean,
That,
fair enough. It probably wouldn't have happened that way. Movie magic.
yeah. Well, I also, like, I liked the twist that Gloria used to be the mistress of Tanzini.
Mm-hmm.
I would have liked if they maybe drew a stronger line between her realizing how they had kind of used her and spit her out.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's part of why she wants to, like in some ways saving Phil is saving herself.
Yeah.
That she's not going to see one more person get ground up in this, that in some ways it feels like it's too late for her, but she doesn't want to see this kid who still has a chance to be something, to live a life, get ground up the same, in not exactly the same way she did, but by the same system that ground her up as well.
Yeah, and I feel like maybe you could argue that it would be in the subtext, but it would have been nice if it had been like more like explicit within the film itself, that connection, because I feel like the connection of her with the mob was like very underdeveloped, a little underexplored, and I would have liked a little bit more of it. But when you think of it as just like an action story, like, those don't always go into a lot of depth. It's just a lot of
Cassavetes himself, like, he is in the brief time he has between this is made and his death. I say brief time, it's like 9 years. That he is kind of baffled that it is his best received movie, because to him, it was just a stupid pot boiler that he wasn't really invested in. And he was just doing for the money. And didn't really care about the same way, and wasn't trying to say anything with. And he didn't feel like there was much emotional depth or any depth at all to the characters or the script, because it was just meant to be a pot boiler. And so, that's where, I think that's also where, like, we're talking about like plot holes or, holes in character and stuff. Some of it might just come down to John just didn't care.
yeah.
It's like, because again, keep in mind, like we talked about in part one, initially he just wrote the script. He wasn't going to direct it, and only got brought in to direct it once his wife got involved as the lead. And so, I think, especially from, any issues with the script, there was probably a lot of, this is fine. Just give me my check. Okay, we're fine. I don't care.
And if this is what we used to call a TV movie, this would be an excellent TV movie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely. Tonight on NBC,
right.
Gena Rowlands is Gloria.
Yeah, I think overall, like, it was pretty heartwarming. Like, for it on paper, it just seemed like an intense kind of story from what I read of the description, but ended up working for me more than I anticipated. Not that I was going in expecting to hate it or anything, but unfortunately, sometimes your guys' picks end up being this slog, unfortunately for me. But I was pleasantly surprised it was not this time. I think, like, the fact that this kid, I mean, this would have broken anybody, what this kid endured in this movie. And so I really like that it explored that interesting side of things, and Gloria as a character. I don't know if I'd ever like really rewatch the movie, but like I still am glad to have watched it, to have seen a different type of movie than what I normally would. So it's kind of like a 3.5 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, I'm probably in around that same range. Like, in theory, like, and this is true of a lot of Cassavetes movies, where, like, if you just read the plot on paper, it speaks to me much more than the actual execution. That there's something about, that there were a couple times, with like some of the scenes of, okay, we've got to run again, And then, some of the down scenes in various hotel rooms and flop houses between Gloria and Phil, they sometimes felt repetitive,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
And so there were times, and I also need to keep in mind I was watching, my first watch through of this was when I was still recovering from being pretty sick, and so my ADD was not my friend, and so that might have also affected my ability to focus and enjoy it the way I would have with at a different time. But like this one, I still enjoyed it, even if there are parts I thought didn't work and it didn't quite connect with me the way I would have hoped it would, given all the other elements. But it was still enjoyable. Like if I might, to Kristen's point, I might not necessarily go out of my way to rewatch it too much. But if someone said they were going to put it on, I'd be cool with that. That
Yeah. And it's a 4 out of 5 for me. Only really just because it's sentimental. Like it's
oh yeah,
something,
yeah, yeah, no, totally.
it's not a compared to the my favorite movies. It's not up there, but from that angle, it's just
Yeah.
more of a in the heart kind of a favorite. I hear your point about the repetitiveness, and at one point I was thinking, man, as someone who for someone who understands all those who understand New York City, Manhattan, and the boroughs, at first you can kind of understand, okay, you're in the Bronx and, go to Penn Station or go to MSG or whatever. And then at a certain point, you're just thinking, just go across the bridge and go to New Jersey and run. Like, I didn't understand that part either. Like, why don't you just take off? She had enough
Yeah.
money to take a cab to Atlanta if she wanted.
Yeah. Well, or even just, like, okay, stop going to like places and settling down. That's where they find you. This is the 1980s. It's not like they have cell phones and
Right.
cameras everywhere and all these different ways to spot you and track you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like just stay on the move, like just stay hopping various trains and cabs and stuff. Like they'll never pin you down. Although, occasionally she just randomly will run into, the people the plot dictates need to catch her um, on those in those situations. But also, like at the beginning of the movie, just before they left the first place, uh, they do a whole news story that Gloria watches and the audience gets to see, where Gloria is suspected of kidnapping Phil, and it's all over the TV news. And you think that's going to be a bigger part of the plot, like that's setting something up, that it's not just the mob that's looking for her, it's the cops and the whole city because they think she kidnapped this kid. But that never comes into play again in the rest of the movie. Like,
Yeah.
like you would expect, like in this day and age, like, people would constantly be like, oh, that's her. She's got the kid. Let's stop her. No one ever goes, hey, isn't that Gloria from, like, isn't that lady from the news? No. So,
Yeah, that would have added an extra level of stress to the whole plot if the police and regular
yeah.
like citizen
And,
vigilantes were after her too.
and that would have also added reasons, Rob, to your point. She couldn't just like get out of town right away, and also why they couldn't just stay on keep moving on various public transportation, that they would have to try and find places to lay low because as soon as someone sees their face, they're going to start shouting.
There's I caught something. Well, it's not like I caught it. We all saw it, but I don't know if we haven't acknowledged it. I thought it was kind of cool. I don't know if I'm supposed to think that the mob has guys that sit on the back of a bus and take all the buses around the city, but at one point she gets on the bus and she goes straight to the back because she recognizes
No,
a mouthpiece for the mafia.
yeah, no, because I think that's after she went to the bank. Like that's just as they leave the bank, if I
Hmm.
remember correctly. And so, especially watching it through the second time to make some additional notes, um, because like that's when I really made the notes for like the intros of what I was gonna, the nicknames I was gonna give to everybody,
Hmm.
was on that second pass through, and my impression is they'd spotted her, like they set that up because they knew they'd spotted her like at the bank or going into the bank.
Oh, okay. So he hopped on or something and
Yeah, like that was set up because they knew where she was already.
got it.
You know, that's kind of the impression I got from especially watching it the second time. But who knows? Like there are a couple others, like I'm not remembering the specifics where it does feel more serendipitous. Like okay,
Mm-hmm.
really? Oh, like I think one that's more kind of like that, like because we mentioned the first cab driver who was just cool with riding her around and even gets into some action, like running from some of the guys, and like she has to pull a gun on it, the other car that's chasing them and, slaps her five. But then there was the other cab driver, like Gloria goes out to get donuts and the uh, uh, one of the mobsters sees her and gets in the cab with her. So Gloria pretends like the guy is assaulting her.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so the cab driver stops and the mobster then throws a racist slur at him.
Mm-hmm.
And the cab driver gets out. And that's when you realize the cab driver is like 7 feet tall or something.
He was
Like,
huge.
yeah. He was like Ed Too Tall Jones. Which people will learn about if we ever watch any of the Police Academy movies. But then, and tells the guy, like, get out of my cab.
I was actually looking at him to see like if I could recognize an old school basketball player because I just thought maybe he was somebody, because he was exceptionally tall.
Yeah, well, but it was also cool. Like he just like calmly goes out, like, get out of my cab, man.
Yeah.
Like I don't want you in my cab. I don't care how much money you give me. Get out of my cab. Don't be touching my cab.
Yep. End of story.
New York taxi drivers do not mess around.
Yeah.
It's not their business, but also they don't want drama. Get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, it was, but that guy was another cool one. But overall, Rob, and you had said, despite this being one you remember from childhood, you actually hadn't seen it in a very long time.
Yeah, no, I hadn't. So it had like a lot of kind of meant something to me, and then seeing it again recently, there was some new things I caught, and
yeah. Well, but I mean that's just where you were almost like taking a flyer on it, like where it was like, I only, like you say, I kind of remember watching this as a kid. Let's rewatch it and see if it holds up, and so that was kind of fun to revisit with you.
I'm definitely not trying to see the remake.
We'll talk about that in the aftermath.
Let's do it.
I thought,
So
the aftermath.
That's literally what it's called in the script, man.
No, I think you did it as Fallout this time.
Fallout, yeah. Sorry. Usually I call it aftermath. I think I stole that aftermath from OSW.
The destruction.
Anyway, so that was the movie and our thoughts. But what did the world of 1980 think? Well, the movie premiered at the 37th, yes, that's how you say that word, Venice International Film Festival and took home the top prize, tying with Louis Malle's Atlantic City for the prestigious Golden Lion. Many critics felt it was John Cassavetes' best film to date, and it holds a Rotten Tomatoes score of 91%. Legendary director Akira Kurosawa listed it as one of his favorite films. Gena Rowlands' performance in particular was praised, with her receiving Golden Globe and Academy Award nominations for Best Actress for her work. At the box office, it has a reported gross of just over $4 million against a $4 million budget. This is from Box Office Mojo, and it has a very minuscule amount for international, which I don't think is right. Wikipedia says it made $4.9 million at the box office, but it cites Box Office Mojo as the source, so who knows how much it made. Most likely, it lost money on its initial release because the studio doesn't get 100% of the box office, but it probably did break even or made a small profit with subsequent releases, home video, and licensing to TV and cable. It's always so hard to tell with these kind of things that, because you guys have heard the term Hollywood accounting, where because it's so easy to say, okay, this expense, this overhead is charged to the film. I mean, like a movie like Ghostbusters technically has never made a profit. The 1984 Ghostbusters, according to how its accounts are done, has never made a profit.
Yeah, that's crazy. Just like how
Well,
they figure out the numbers and everything. I don't get it.
Licensing, however, yeah.
Well, but that's also where you want. Are you guys, Rob? You might be familiar with the difference between net and gross points.
Right. Oh no! Wait. In the film, no. I'll let you
What?
explain it. I don't want.
Okay. So, Kristen, have you ever heard gross or net points in regards to Hollywood?
No, not really.
So, points is regarded to like a percentage of the box office you get. Net points are after recoupment. So they are the net box office after profit. Gross,
Domestic only or all in?
all in.
Okay.
Gross, I guess sometimes it could depend on the deal, but gross are literally what it sounds like. So from the dollar taken in before accounting for expenses. So like when you hear about like Robert Downey Jr. made $75 million on an Avengers movie, that's because he held gross points in the movie and made a percentage off of the box office total. With net points, you always want to go for gross. You never want to go for net because you will often never see net. Um, so, like going back to that Ghostbusters example, uh, Ghostbusters uh, had a deal with a company called Filmation in order to be able to use the name because there was actually a live action TV series that had appeared in the 1970s called Ghostbusters. And so they had to license the name from Filmation. And Filmation got net points on the movie and never saw a dime. That they got like an upfront fee, but they also got net point participation and never saw anything off of it. So it's,
Reminds me of the music business. Yes.
yes, well,
Yep.
but it's also like it gets confusing because like it used to be, you could pretty much guarantee that the theater and the studios had a 50-50 split between box office. So you could just kind of rule of thumb it and say, like, if a movie made $4 million at the box office, the studio took in $2 million. But these days, they have a lot more unusual agreements where like like especially like Disney will strong arm a bunch of stuff into their agreements. Where it'll be like, okay, for the first week we actually get 90% and you guys get 10%, and then for the second week that drops down to 70% and 30, and then by the fifth week it's actually to 90-10 to the theater, but by then with how these blockbusters go, almost all the money is made in the first week. So that makes the Hollywood accounting even more complicated, of figuring out like what actually flowed to the studio, and then international deals get even different. So, most likely the movie made money. Like if you're talking just in a true profit and loss for the studio, it was most likely a worthwhile endeavor, but probably didn't mean much to the bottom lines for anyone involved outside of getting residual payments. Jumping back real quick, the movie Louis Malle is a famous director. Atlantic City stars like Susan Sarandon. Um, he also did Rob. You've heard of like My Dinner with Andre
Hmm.
with Wallace Shawn, that famous movie. He directed that. He was also married to Candice Bergen for many years. They had a child together. Moving on. John Cassavetes would go on to direct two more films. He made Love Streams in 1984 for Cannon Films, a weird fit. For those of you who don't know, Cannon Films are known for their B productions like Chuck Norris's Missing in Action or Chuck Norris's The Delta Force, or our favorite, The Apple. Uh, two, but he made Love Streams in 1984 for Cannon Films to universal acclaim. It was actually surprisingly a good movie for Cannon Films. In 1986, he teamed again with Peter Falk for Big Trouble. And it also starred Valerie Curtin, who co-wrote Toys, which we covered on episode 8, to universal disdain, including the director himself. He did not like that movie. Cassavetes would pass away at the age of 59 from complications of cirrhosis caused by his lifelong alcoholism. At the time of his death, he was reportedly working on a sequel to Gloria. Gena Rowlands remained married to Cassavetes until his death. She would continue acting in films like Light of Day, which we covered on episode 2, She's So Lovely, and The Notebook, both directed by her son Nick Cassavetes. And She's So Lovely was based on a script John Cassavetes had written before his death called She's to Lovely. Um, and Gena was on TV shows like Monk and NCIS. She would pass away on August 14th, 2024, at the age of 94 from complications of Alzheimer's and just generally being 94. Juan Adams, who also played Phil Dawn, was credited as John Adams, never acted again, and returned to private life with little known about what he has done since. There was a remake in 1999 starring Sharon Stone and George C. Scott and directed by legendary filmmaker Sidney Lumet, behind the guy behind like 12 Angry Men and Network and many other incredible films. But the less said about this, the better, because I actually watched it last weekend. And moving on.
Everything's connected.
I've never heard you react to a movie like that, so that's pretty bad.
It's crazy that we have not only a connection to Warriors in this, but also toys.
Right.
Well, Toys and Light of Day, like
and Light of Day, yeah.
Three of our movies. That it all just keeps connecting, and will continue to do so. It's 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, Cine-to-Nerdle Battle. It's all that kind of stuff. Basically, like they made a lot of baffling changes. Like there were changes I would make to Gloria with how some slight stuff like we talked about with how they characterized Gloria and they characterized Phil. But the changes, like they kept a lot of that stuff I didn't like about the characterization and then made other changes that just made the movie worse. And yeah, it's like just you question why the whole thing exists. Any final thoughts as we wrap things up? I did think of one thing I wanted to bring up, but anything on your guys' end?
No, I don't think so. I think I covered it all, like in my final thoughts.
Yeah.
Interesting to watch. Interesting watch for sure. I'm glad that I liked this one a little better than some of the other picks because I don't like being a hater.
That's fine. I try and, do my best to appreciate every movie, even if, sometimes I have to say, whether it's my pick or your guys' pick, even if I sometimes have to go, what, I can appreciate this for what it is just not my thing, this case, I enjoyed it pretty well. Yeah. Rob, let's get your any final thoughts for you, and then I'll bring up something that we actually talked about offline during the last recording, and then we'll go in.
Yeah, no, I think I've said everything I had to say. One maybe final thing is just if you're interested in a sort of a a throwback film and you like the New York City or inner city settings, this is a easy watch.
Yeah. Well, so Gloria, in addition to the straight remake, the 99 Sharon Stone, also inspired a lot of other movies with very similar plots that, were whether homages or inspired bys or whatever, including, and this was something I was thinking about the whole time I was watching it, a movie I like slightly better, despite the fact it is very problematic in this day and age, a movie called Leon the Professional, starring Gary Oldman and Natalie Portman and Luc Besson. Not Luc Besson. Luc Besson was the director. It's Jean Reno. Also has Louise Guzman and the female lead from, I can't remember her name. It's the blonde lady from Little Shop of Horrors. But that, and Danny Aiello, but that's a very good movie and has a lot of similar plot elements. And in terms of how they introduce characters, and some of that, I kind of preferred that because, like, in that you get this nice glimpse of a pre-state, like what Jean Reno's character is like. What his life is like before he gets thrown together with Natalie Portman's character, and you get an idea of what her life and her home life is like and who she is as a character. And so then once they're thrown together, you get a better sense of how they're growing and changing and evolving, But like I said, I also understand, how that movie is, with its Lolita elements in it, is a little more awkward today.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, well, especially like we were talking about, like, how, when we were talking about it offline, where, apparently Luc Besson was married to a 16-year-old at the time, and which makes the whole thing even more awkward. But anyway, who knows? Maybe one day we'll, do more about the movie, that movie. But that is one of a couple of films that was somewhat inspired by Gloria and has a similar dynamic between the protagonists. And I like I said, despite its some of its rougher elements, especially from a modern day watch, I probably would still recommend it because it has some really cool action moments, and Gary Oldman being a madman on with his character on amphetamines the whole time. So awesome.
He's awesome.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, there's just like a famous scene in there where he's like looking up, like he puts an amphetamine pill in his mouth and he like cracks it with his teeth, kind of rolls his neck while staring up at the camera. And then there's another one like towards the end where like they're trying to take out Jean Reno and Natalie Portman's character. And Jean Reno's character is a professional hitman, hence Leon the Professional. So he's like this ultra badass guy, and Gary Oldman's this super corrupt cop. And so like they're raiding the building to try and get him out, and they're like getting their butts kicked. And Gary Oldman goes to one of his guys, get me everyone. What do you mean, everyone? And Oldman just screams, everyone. And like that's like one you'll even like hear clips like of that like played in like hip hop and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, he loses it. It's actually it's really enjoyable.
Yeah. I just had remembered we had talked. It's one of those things like we need to sometimes be careful what we talk about offline, because then we forget like we didn't talk about that on air. And I knew, like, we even said yesterday, because we recorded part one yesterday. Like, hey, let's make sure to bring some of this back in when we record tomorrow. And we got to the end. I was like, oh crap, we almost forgot about that. So
yeah, now we're trying to make it a bonus.
Yeah, that was the movie, how the world of 1980 reacted to it, and what we thought of it. But we want to know what you think. Tell us the things we got right, all the things we got totally wrong, and everything in between. You can do that in the comments if the platform you listen to us allows comments. If not, you can do that on social media. We are at Savage Movie Nights on Instagram and Facebook. That's Savage Movie Nights with an S, which is different than everywhere else. Follow us there so you can stay up to date on the latest with the show, and drop in the comments to share your thoughts. Now that we have begrudgingly saved the kid, taken on the mob, and ended up in the hell that is Pittsburgh, we have to look at what's next. And next, we need to flee to a vaguely defined South American country, load up our trucks with a bunch of old, unstable dynamite, and start to drive across the roughest roads imaginable, trying not to explode, because we are talking all about the 1977 William Friedkin classics Sorcerer, starring Roy Scheider. Sorcerer is available to rent or buy from Apple, Amazon, Google, Fandango at Home, and more. It is also available on DVD and Blu-ray if you want a good old-fashioned physical copy, or you can be a real hipster and find it on VHS and Laserdisc. But however you find it, watch it, and come right back here next month to listen to us talk all about it with a special guest, our first ever guest on the show. Thanks so much to our editor, Javi, and the entire Savage Content team. Thanks so much to my co-hosts, Rob and Kristen. Thanks so much to our sponsor, No Regrets, the music and spirit of Billie Holiday. And most importantly, thanks so much to all of you for listening. Please give us 5 stars and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, give us a like, a follow, ring the bell, drop in the comments, all the good YouTube things. I've been your host, Adam. We'll see you next time on the Savage Movie Night Podcast.